Considering how popular the Nintendo GameCube has been for the past decade or so, it's really interesting looking back on the history of the console and the games that people were really enthusiastic about back then. Because these days, I feel as if there's a lot more appreciation for more niche stuff. I feel like people are more willing to acknowledge the successes of Luigi's Mansion and The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker and games like Chibi Robo, which no one even bought back in the day. Chibi Robo was this, massive, massive failure that no one played or talked about. But it is very interesting to me looking back on the GameCube, seeing how a massive million seller like Tales of Symphonia was this huge culturally defining Nintendo GameCube game. A game that like a lot of huge GameCube fans played back in the day, that this was this huge milestone release that everyone who played it loved it, and yet today feels like it's kind of fallen into obscurity. And I do think that is because the sequel wasn't as well received, that Tales did not continue on Nintendo platforms, that Tales suffered a kind of dark age for a long time until just recently with the release of Tales of Arise. Like I felt that Tails is something that was really, really big back in the day and kind of died a death. And it's very unfortunate because of this decline that I never got around to playing Tales of Symphonia because I was told by everyone who had played it that it was just a generic RPG, that it wasn't that big of a deal, that it wasn't that great. And it's taken quite a long time, 20 years after its initial release to go back and play it. And it's not because I was that enthusiastic about Symphonia specifically. I got back into Tales because I played Tales of Arise on PC, really loved it. Went back and played Tales of Asperia on Nintendo Switch, loved that, and ended up picking up Tales of Symphonia on sale. It is very interesting playing Tales as an adult and kind of wondering if I would have been a big fan of this growing up because my initial inclination is to say no because I've never been all that crazy about the action combat of Tales. I've never really enjoyed like the art style or the world design or anything. And it's so strange, playing this as an adult and like becoming a fan of it because like all of my apprehensions about playing these games as a kid are still very much true today. I still feel like Tails is kind of cheesy. I feel like, it is kind of childish. I do kind of feel as if it's not the most technically advanced RPG series, Like back in the day, I was playing like games like Batten Kaido's Origins and Final Fantasy, which had way more, I felt, more mature themes, better cinematics, better visuals that were just, more worth my time than this. And playing Tales, after playing all those games and a couple of more, I kind of understand the appeal of Tales. Like it isn't my favorite RPG series, not by a long shot, but I do understand the core appeal of it. And that is just the sheer depth and creativity of the character writing. Like I think Tales by a large large margin actually has the best character writing out of any RPG franchise. So what this means is that although the plots aren't all that complex, even though the settings are kind of basic, the characters themselves are very, very extremely fleshed out and nuanced, from their personalities to their backgrounds to their prejudices to their relationships and dynamics with other characters. Because of how fleshed out they are, playing these games is endlessly entertaining. It is shocking, going through Tales of Vesperia and seeing just how the characters grow and develop throughout. And Symphonia, although I don't feel as if it's nearly as good, is shaping up to be, along the same vein. It has this incredibly interesting cast with in this setting going about their adventure, and it is very investing to see just what happens as the plot develops. You get all these really good, engaging moments with them interacting with each other, and you just feel so invested in what's going on. It is an incredibly engaging experience. And I really have to wonder, like, is this something that I missed out on as a kid? Is this something that I didn't get to experience? Is this something that, like, I genuinely missed out on? Or did I make the right decision in passing up on this back in the day? Well, like I remember, in the GameStop, looking at games, and there were two major RPGs I wanted to pick up. There was a copy of Tales of Symphonia, and there was a copy of Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. And in the end, I went with Path of Radiance. And that specific game went on to be one of my all-time favorites. Fire Emblem became one of my favorite things of all time. That was one of my all-time favorite games, one of my all-time favorite RPGs. One of my favorite stories in any game ever. Like Fire Emblem Path of Radiance is just a masterpiece through and through. So, even if Tales of Symphonia is good, I wouldn't have traded that experience playing Fire Emblem for the first time for the world. And it's just kind of remarkable, looking back on it because, I absolutely made the right choice, but at the same time, Tales of Symphonia wasn't a bad game. It just wasn't on the level of the other things that I was enjoying at the time. But that kind of what makes discovering Tales as an adult so interesting is that I'm going back, experiencing this game for what it is, and kind of realizing that, like, it wasn't necessarily a wrong choice. Like, the game is still genuinely good. It's still genuinely heart wrenching. There are plenty of things to like about it. The visual style is distinct. It looks like an anime, like, looks and feels like an anime. You can argue it's kind of cliche and basic, but at the same time, you spend so much time with the characters and the world, you end up feeling very invested in it anyway. It is it's a very interesting kind of formula that Tales has going for it because I think it's very Dragon Quest like in its kind of structure where it's more about like going around an open world, interacting with NPCs, trying to figure out how to advance the plot. It's not as scripted as Final Fantasy. There are puzzles to solve, there are places to go. It's not always clear exactly what you're supposed to do. And like in that sense, it respects your intelligence a lot more than you would expect. And that's kind of how I feel about Tales as an IP is that it's very deceptive in that it looks like a kid's game, it looks like it's made for very young audiences, and it is, but at the same time, these games tackle very strong, very adult concepts in a very nuanced way. For example, the core plot of the first half of the game that Colette is the chosen on a journey with her group to become an angel so she can save the world. It's a generic JRPG setup. Like I was noting during my playthrough of this that it's very similar to Final Fantasy X, with the idea that you have this group of friends, taking this girl out to like, be sacrificed. But what makes it different than Final Fantasy X is that it really takes the time to emphasize that like Colette is hiding things from the others, that she's losing her senses, that she's like, losing her humanity. And it's something that Lloyd and the others, especially Lloyd, like become increasingly uncomfortable with. So when the plot twist hits, plot twist for a 20-year-old game, when the plot twist hits that the angels are actually evil, it doesn't feel forced or inorganic or ridiculous. Like it actually makes perfect sense and kind of leads into what the game had been building up to until that point. And what's more, after the plot twist, there's some very serious repercussions because it takes quite a bit of time to uh to save Colette from what happened to her. You actually feel invested in her. She's not kidnapped or anything. She's just an empty shell with no soul. But like, she's still part of the party and she can still fight, but she doesn't talk anymore. And there's just this very strong presence by her just being there, but not really being there. It's interesting because in a lot of ways, you could argue that Lloyd and Colette are very basic character archetypes. And at the same time, the way they're presented in the game, they become extremely engaging. Tails is exactly as complex as it needs to be. It doesn't spend a lot of time, with exposition or world building or draw like trying to flesh out its concepts. It just throws things at you and just kind of expects you to roll with it. And honestly, like I really really like it because it feels very natural. It feels like a real things are actually happening to the characters. It doesn't feel like you're being railroaded down a prescripted plot. It feels like you're interacting with like an organic world and characters that actually have like goals, ambitions, dreams of their own. Like it is like it's shocking how, the NPCs in this game feel like they have they're way more fleshed out than the average NPC in other RPGs, because they all have names, they all have backgrounds, locations, people they care about, relationships with the plot. Like it just feels as if Tales has this very unique way of getting across the game's themes and stories. And for the most part, they do it in a very subtle, very unassuming way. The game is like Tales, I think, is very underrated when it comes to its storytelling capabilities because playing this game for the first time, like it really did feel as if the game was very basic, but that is very deceptive because the game's nuances and subtleties like just build up so well and so effectively that over time you end up really invested in what's going on. It's become a bit of a stereotype in recent years that Nintendo fans hate JRPGs, and I really have to wonder why. I really have to wonder why, all these major GameCube era fanboys just never really talk about the positive qualities and aspects of Tales of Symphonia. One of the biggest games on the platform, a game that drew a lot of people in, a game that's like a major milestone, a major accomplishment for the GameCube that was not known for having a lot of very good RPGs. Like this game really stuck out, even back then as this absolute gem of an RPG that a lot of people were very passionate and enthusiastic about. But today, when you look at Nintendo YouTubers, they have a reputation of just having this disdain for this style of RPG. They hate anime, they hate this kind of combat, they hate the stereotypes, they hate everything about it. And I really have to wonder why. Especially when a lot of them are propping up games that nobody played back in the day. Games like Chibi Robo and things like that. Like Tales of Symphonia was this like major milestone RPG that had a lot of respect among people in that community, in that sphere. And I really have to wonder like why did we as Nintendo GameCube fans like let this game kind of fade into obscurity? Because I can tell you over the past 20 years, like Tales of Symphonia was a very big deal when it came out and was the cult favorite for a lot of people. But these days, I haven't heard it brought up at all. And you could argue it's because of Tales' decline in popularity. You can argue it's because of this or that, the sequel. But like, I feel like a lot of GameCube fans to this day haven't really given this game a chance. Like I personally was driven away from this game based on like some preconceived notions about it, that it was like kind of a lower budget, low effort RPG that was just kind of generic. And now that I've actually played it, I I can tell you for a fact that that isn't actually true. Like, yeah, I don't like this game as much as Vesperia. I don't like it as much as Arise, but at the same time, like I still really, really like the game for what it is. And honestly, being someone who's, grew up with a GameCube and really enjoys it, like playing this game it's giving me a new appreciation for that period for the GameCube, and I really have to wonder if back in the Super Nintendo, the N64 era, the GameCube era, like how many great games go under the radar because of just people freaking out about them for petty reasons, because we see this all the time with the Nintendo Switch. I talked extensively about Mario and Luigi Brothership and what a great game that was. Like, I talked a lot about Princess Peach Showtime and what a great game that is. Like, it feels like right now, everybody just incessantly complains about things that don't actually matter when it comes to these releases. For example, Donkey Kong Emerald Rush. I'm seeing people beginning to kneel and acknowledge that Emerald Rush is a really good mode that has dozens of hours of content. That's a lot of fun to play. But the narrative now has become that, like, well, they shouldn't have sold it at $20. And that is a giant cope considering what the game is and how much content there is and how much work they put into it. Like $20 is too much, bro. Uh, and over time, I think Emerald Rush is going to be a beloved aspect of Bonanza's legacy. But at the same time, why did we go through this initial period, launch window period, of everyone pretending that they were getting ripped off or that it shouldn't have cost any money and that Nintendo shouldn't have released any DLC for this at all? It should have been included in the base game. Like, you were not talking about the Emerald Rush DLC at all. You were talking about the price point. You were doing everything but talking about the actual game. And that's kind of how I feel whenever I see, Nintendo YouTubers like freak out about RPGs. Whenever I see like, people like downplay Fire Emblem or, Xenoblade or whatever. It's like it's just this specific niche of people who can't respect something like this and can't take the time to play it or learn anything about it, and so make these insane claims about them. Uh, I For Nintendo YouTubers, attacking RPGs is just part of the culture. But when you look at the audience, when you look at the people who like, are looking for new games to play and are excited by it, like this behavior absolutely has a negative effect on the culture because people are told obsessively that RPGs don't matter, that they're not fun to play, that nobody likes them, that no one wants to see this, and people feel discouraged from checking these games out. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I think, is a really good example of this, where this was this really well-made, engaging, 100-hour-long game, my favorite Xenoblade game, and yet, for some reason, there was this huge push to try and make the game out like it was terrible and that nobody liked it and that it was censored and that there were like all these weird like controversies that, considering the game's length and like how niche it was, it took a long time for the general audience to understand that 3 was a very, very, very good game. And but at the same time, like mainstream audiences never really had the chance to have that hype period. They were never allowed to be excited for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 in general Nintendo areas, fan groups, because Xenoblade, Fire Emblem, those aren't real Nintendo games. And it's it's something that I think really needs to be called out because the RPG hate is unwarranted. It's ridiculous, it's absurd, it's a big blow against something which I consider to be like one of Nintendo's most hardcore genres. RPGs by their nature take a lot of are very time consuming uh and take a lot of skill to complete. So, like downplaying these games, getting frustrated about them while constantly begging Nintendo for more story-driven games like Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. It comes off as this like huge double standard. I have a very hard time believing that anybody would play or and love Paper Mario, but not have any interest in something like this, something like Xenoblade, something like Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem, Intelligent Systems, which comes from the same studio. I'm just so tired of Nintendo YouTubers acting as if Nintendo needs to stamp their their brand onto every genre in order to be playable. You know, Tails is something that absolutely should be seen as a Nintendo GameCube classic, and it is among people who grew up playing it. But for general Nintendo fans, this is something that a lot of people just wrote off and ignored a long time ago, and that is an absolute shame. Tales of Symphonia is not my new favorite GameCube game or something I wished I played growing up, the way that Tales of Vesperia was for the Xbox 360, but at the same time, I really like and appreciate it for what it is. And at this period in my life, I really enjoy like discovering things that like I missed out on when I was younger. So even if it's not like some milestone RPG, like I still really enjoy playing it. And that's definitely something that I think a lot of people in the community really need to understand is that like if you're aching for new games, if you want new experiences, why don't you consider playing something like Tales? Why don't you consider playing games from 10, 20 years ago, experiencing these remasters you've never played or these games you've never heard of? Like, why not just go on the deals page on the eShop and just buy Tales of Symphonia for $10? That's what I did. I had no intention of buying Symphonia. I was going to get Tales of Graces next. So I bought this game on sale. And, for $10, this was a lot of fun. I've been spending a lot of time playing this. And, I'll probably beat it within the next month or so. But it really needs to be said that, like, I keep seeing people complaining, about prices, about what Nintendo is doing, about like, modern games. And I'm just like, you don't have to buy the new games if you don't want to. If it was really an issue, if the price point really was something that put you off, like you can just save your money and buy something like this. But you will never ever see the general Nintendo community acknowledging that they don't have to buy the brand new thing, that they can go back and buy older classics, that they can play older games. Like this is something that I think people should understand and know that, like, Tales of Symphonia, even if they are a little bit dated, even if they aren't the best, like, these games are still perfectly playable and are well worth your time if you're in that position where you can't necessarily spend money on big, new, exciting projects. And if you're a GameCube fan, why exactly do you not spend time acknowledging the value in games like this existing? Because it may not be your favorite thing, it may not be your cup of tea, but at the same time, there should be a lot of cross appeal between this and something like Wind Waker, something like Chibi Robo, something that's a bit more whimsical, something with that specific art style and design philosophy. Like there should be a lot of appreciation for what Tales of Symphonia did for GameCube owners back in the day. But it's never something that comes up. It's never something that's acknowledged. It's never something that people bring up. Like it's just one of those games that's just been written off because it's an RPG and that's not a real video game. And that is a mindset that we do need to kind of move past. It is something that we do need to call out. It is becoming annoying. It is obnoxious. It is out of touch with reality. I do feel as if GameCube babies really tend to put like mediocre games like Chibi Robo or Mario Sunshine on a pedestal while downplaying games like this. Games that had that were huge success stories on the console that proved that third-party games were viable on GameCube. This is something that really should have been celebrated more at the peak of its relevancy. But instead, it's just been written off and ignored and brushed under the rug because we can't allow a game like this to be popular on Nintendo consoles because uh, we just don't. Okay, it's definitely something that I have a big problem with, something that I've always called out, and yeah, it very well may be a major reason why I never got into this game when I was younger. But eventually I did discover it. Eventually I did play this game. I am enjoying it, and I am going to play more Tales games on Nintendo hardware going forward. So I suppose as of this video, you can call me a Tales fan.